So I want to talk briefly about the 5 big main copes that most people have still to remain Roman Catholic, and then what the solutions are, and then we'll open it up to people who disagree, people who challenge it. And we're going to talk a little bit too about how Protestantism isn't the correct reaction against Roman Catholicism, but that rather it went into a ridiculous extreme in the wrong direction. So Protestantism is not going to get you the medicine that the Roman Catholic Church at least claims to have with its sacraments and so forth. And so I kind of listed out my 5 most common. People are always asking me about coughing. So it's because where we live, it's near a giant 12-mile preserve. And at this time, the allergens are literally in the red every day. Especially around 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock is when it gets really bad. So it's a lot better earlier in the day. But it has nothing to do with, like, when are you going to go see a doctor? It's not a doctor can't solve allergens, dude. So what are the 5 copes, and then kind of the overriding cope, and then why is Protestantism not really a solution? And then we'll open it up to people who have disagreements, questions, challenges, arguments, debates, etc. over on X. So if you're interested in calling in, the link is right here. You can call in there to the space, and then I will pull you up. Thank you. Already getting some fat super chats. Appreciate that. I will pull you up, give you the microphone, and you can make any questions, challenges, arguments that you want. First point is that I hear most often nowadays as to why people are remaining there is that this came up the other day in the Blonde in the Belly of the Beast stream. Well, I should stay in the Roman Catholic Church because it's my job, it's my duty to reform it and to fix it. And the problem with this, as we pointed out in that stream, is that the nature of that institution, the way it's structured, is not going to allow you, as the bottom of the totem pole, even if you have great numbers, to alter dogma. The dogmatic level has already been solidified when it comes to Vatican II, when it comes to Nostra Aetate, when it comes to the changes in the dogmas, such as changes in the death penalty, changes in what's appropriate in terms of priestly blessings for skittles, changes when it comes to the issue of what's appropriate for people receiving communion. That has changed in the Roman Catholic Church. Changes at the dogmatic level in terms of whether it's acceptable and appropriate to worship with and amongst pagans, with and amongst heterodox, with and amongst Muslims, all of which things the post-Vatican II papacy has done. And those are not just private sins. Those are actually sins that in the Roman Catholic system constitute apostasy. If you don't know, the Roman Catholic system is actually full of tiers, not just of sins in terms of mortal sin, venial sin, but also that canon law dictates different types of sins that remove you from the church and that are actions so severe that they sever you from the mystical body. And the same is true for clerics as well. Clerics aren't exempt from that just because they're clerics. And if you ask typical Roman Catholics this, you say, if the Bishop of Milan stands up and starts preaching against the Trinity, does that make him a heretic? Or is he a heretic only when the papacy calls him a heretic? Well, I think most Roman Catholics tend to think, well, he's a heretic in virtue of the heresy. And even if he is in error, he's still a heretic. Or even if he's in good faith. Now, I don't know how you could be in good faith and not believe in the Trinity, but they'll make all kinds of specious arguments like this to rescue the system. And so what you have there is, in philosophy, we call this an unfalsifiable system. And pretty much at every juncture in the Roman Catholic system, there's sort of this little firewall, so to speak, where anything that comes up immediately meets the unfalsifiable sort of magic move that goes on to where, this appears to be a contradiction, this appears to be a change, it's not infallible. So this is the first move they always make. Oh, well, you see this wasn't infallible, and so this can change. And this goes along with the idea of I can fix it, because in both cases, the individual Roman Catholic is taking upon themselves a position that, first and foremost, is not allowed for the laity. The laity in that system are not able to, quote, fix the church, because the laity are not in a position to judge the first see. And every Roman Catholic who's angry with Francis and all the post-Vatican II reforms and all of what's going on, all the scandals, is already incorrect, because although they might have a position to say that, I don't know, if Francis was, let's say he's like one of the Borgias and he has a giant a whorehouse or something built. And okay, you might say that a Roman Catholic individual, lay person could say that that's immoral. But it's different when it comes to theological teachings, or what's called the ordinary teaching of the church. In the Roman Catholic world, anything that's part of the ordinary teaching, whether it's infallible or fallible, the expectation is that you submit to it with docility. That means you're docile. That means that you're not picking it apart and deciding what you think is orthodox, what you think is faithful, what you think is correct, what's not correct. Do you understand? That's different from the moral infractions that an individual pope might commit. We're talking about within their system, right? So it's true that, if Francis had a giant whorehouse, he wouldn't necessarily be a heretic. And within their system, that's consistent. That's true. They're not on the hook there. They haven't committed any philosophical contradictory mistakes by saying, well, the Pope can be an evil person. The difference, especially in the post-Vatican II period, is that it's not a question of the individual sins of the papacy towards this or that moral question. It's specifically a question about changes in dogmatic teaching, and that's the whole point, supposedly, of the papacy, that it can't change dogmas. Nothing in terms of faith and morals undergoes change. And the reason that the papacy is there is to be the guide, the protector, the preserver, the progenitor, and the interpreter of that apostolic faith, of that deposit. That means, as Vatican I concludes, that the Roman See cannot err in questions of faith or morals. Now, it's true that the Pope could, as a private, quote-unquote, theologian, make a theological error. That is not the same thing as the Pope, even as a private theologian, being a heretic. So you see, this is another unfalsifiable firewall, a move they'll make to say, well, Francis's extremely scandalous teachings and ideas, they're just his private opinions. No, they're not. And by the way, even if they were his private opinions, there's nothing about saying something in a book or in a letter that excludes you from being a heretic. And if you remember one of the recent open forums that we had a person calling in on this very question. And the example that the Sixth Council used to condemn and excommunicate Pope Honorius was a letter he wrote to another bishop. It wasn't a public dogmatic profession. It wasn't something he proclaimed ex cathedra. None of that was necessary to be a formal heretic. And so the outs that they have to try to get around these things are things that don't actually even work in their system. There are myths. Almost every out they use is some myth that they've concocted, such as the idea, for example, the most common one is that, well, the Pope didn't bind anyone to that teaching, and so he's not a heretic. Okay, binding people to a teaching has absolutely nothing to do with heresy. Martin Luther was a priest. Martin Luther had no authority to bind anyone in a dogmatic sense to his teachings. And yet he is excommunicated and called a heretic in the famous encyclical by, I think, Leo X, because he persistently taught error. That's all that's necessary. To be a heretic has nothing to do with the authority that you possess in the office to bind or to not bind people. So this is a total fallacy of irrelevance. It's completely irrelevant to the question of whether the person is teaching something heterodox in whatever form. It doesn't matter whether they publicly profess it with their voice. It doesn't matter whether they write a letter. If the Bishop of Milan writes a letter to his grandmother and expresses that he no longer believes the Trinity, that makes him a heretic. That action. Now, it may not get discovered until, I don't know, Grandma of Milan takes it to the, let's say she takes it to the Pope. She's worried about her grandson. The Pope sees it. The Bishop of Milan is heterodox. He's already committed the sin of heresy. He's already removed himself, even if there's not been a public juridical declaration. That's the Roman Catholic canon law and moral system. That's how it functions. So again, what we see is that most of the time, the objections, the copes, the explanations that are given are complete myths and fantasies. For example, the myth that I only have to believe the, quote, dogmas. This is the next cope of the top 5 copes. The first one is that I can fix it. No, you can't, because as a layperson, you're not in a position to fix Vatican II, to reform the Church of the Spirit of Vatican II. You're not going to get rid of Nostra Aetate. You're not going to convince the Catholic world that Nostra Aetate is a document with a level 7 degree of authority, which you can reject or accept based on your own decisions. Every Roman Catholic church in the world that I've been to that's a Novus Ordo church expects that you accept all of the documents of Vatican II. And the same principles in Nostra Aetate are in the dang frickin' catechism. The very phrases and statements about Muslims and Hindus and everyone worshiping the same quote-unquote God, the same principles and ideas are in the frickin' catechism. So even if you said, well, the Nostra Aetate is not the full dogma, I don't have to accept it, I can pick and choose the Vatican II documents, which ones are... No, you don't. No, you can't. Every Catholic church you attend in the world has the general default expectation that you accept all the documents of Vatican II. So the idea of I can fix it is just completely naive, completely contrary to the structure of this hierarchical organization, and completely laughable in light of what Vatican I actually teaches about the infallibility, inerrancy, and indefectibility of the Roman See, of the Pope. Number 2 cope is I only have to follow XYZ. This is a amazingly prevalent myth in the Roman Catholic world. Where did you get the idea that you, quote, only have to follow the, quote, ex cathedra statements? Number one, there's not actually a list of the ex cathedra statements. And that's why every Roman Catholic comes up with a different list of what the ex cathedra necessary beliefs are. Furthermore, Vatican I is emphatic and states more than once that you also have to believe, beyond the ex cathedra, you also have to believe the universal ordinary teaching, and you have to submit to the ordinary teaching, which can be fallible, but yet with docility. So that's a complete myth. It's absolutely not true that as a Roman Catholic, you only have to believe and accept a handful of, quote, dogmatic or ex cathedra things. It's just made up. It's a myth that one guy, one apologist, one Catholic person says, and then all the other ones just chirp it out and repeat it as if it's true because they heard it somewhere. And they always just chirp out and repeat like mina birds, the same phrases, the same copes, the same responses. And they never even think to consider, well, is that even true? Is it even the case that I only have to believe a handful of dogmatic things? Again, we've highlighted and cited multiple times on Twitter. We've put it up countless times. In Denzinger, there's at least 4 places where it says you even have to accept the juridical decisions. If the Pope says so-and-so is excommunicated, you have to accept it. You don't get the liberty of saying, I think he's wrong there, I don't accept that. It doesn't matter what you want to accept. You don't get to be a Protestant Roman Catholic. And most of the people who think I only have to follow blah, 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 blah. By the way, there's never a consistent, coherent idea of what the handful of dogmatic things even are. They're missing the entire point that they're actually being a Protestant. They're just not being a Protestant with the Bible. They're now being a Protestant with, quote, papal teachings. I will go through and sift through thousands of pages of documents and pick out the ones that I've decided through my fallible mental individual intellect line up with the previous, quote, dogmatic teachings. And yet, no layperson is a member of the magisterium. No layperson has that authority. No layperson is ever granted the ability or the authority to, quote, judge the first see. Judging the first see does not mean that only that you have the canonical privileges to judge it and excommunicate. They have this other cope where they say, well, judging the first see means no. Whoever thought that laity had the ability to excommunicate the Pope or the bishops anyway? That's a completely absurd argument. Nobody has ever thought that. So if it's addressing some impossible absurdity that nobody ever even considered. As if there was a whole bunch of people thinking that the laity could excommunicate the Pope, so they needed to have this statement in canon law that no laity could judge and excommunicate the Pope. It's just completely silly, completely stupid. Obviously, the point is that no one in the church, bishop, council, laity, even the Roman College, none of them have the authority or the ability to judge and supersede the Roman See. Clear as day. That's clear and obvious meaning. And by the way, all these people believe in foundationalism and self-evident truths. Is this not self-evident in your ridiculous position? In your pseudo-Talmudic religion? Is this not obvious? Of course it's obvious. And everybody knows that that's the exact argument they make to every Protestant. Every Roman Catholic, when they make these arguments to the Protestants, they're suddenly ultramontanist super papists. And then when they're in their internecine conflicts, now you see we're papal Protestants picking and choosing where Francis is faithful and where he's failed. But they're not even honest with the people that they think and pretend are their trad popes. Benedict XVI has numerous statements throughout his many books, which are absolutely condemned via Pius X, the Pacendi Dominici Gracious encyclical's list of what counts as modernism. That would condemn multitudes of the statements in Pope Benedict XVI's books as modernist. The book Addendum to Vatican I Lamentabili, which has a list of condemned modernist propositions, also would condemn countless places in the totally modernist books and writings of Benedict XVI. I'm talking about his books before he became a pope. And all of these people, by the way, will cite the trad stuff like the Holy Office condemning books. Oh, wait a minute. Why would the Holy Office condemn books if private theologians and their private opinions don't make you a heretic? Of course they do. The very praxis of your Holy Office condemning the writings of this or that Jesuit, this or that person in the church, putting it on the list of forbidden books, disproves your dumb argument that you have to bind people to it to make it heresy. So at every stage, what these people do is modify and change their position to make the position unfalsifiable. Do you know what I mean by an unfalsifiable position? We talk about this, for example, Marxism is typically critiqued in philosophy as an unfalsifiable position. Why is this? Well, in Marxism, problems, as I'm sure everybody knows, they all come from class warfare. And so if you attempt to critique Marxism or refute it, all of your arguments are automatically canceled out because the only person who would critique or oppose Marxism is somebody who has false consciousness from the bourgeoisie. So your arguments are already canceled out. But wait a minute, so no one can launch a critique of Marxism? Correct, because anyone who does is automatically in false consciousness. So this is why it's typically called an unfalsifiable system, which is actually a system that's very weak. Because a very weak system doesn't need to set up these sort of ridiculous kind of fail-safes and tricks to make the system unfalsifiable. Yet, nothing compares to Marxism in terms of unfalsifiability, except the papacy and the papal system. And ironically, this is even what Döllinger said. I have Döllinger's book here. And he said at the time of Vatican I, when he was very reluctant to accept the definition at Vatican I, he said that, well, hereafter, Roman Catholic apologetics will be basically nothing but people defending the arguments of Vatican I and the Roman See. It will end up being a bunch of papal lawyering. And lo and behold, what do 90% of the Roman Catholic apologists do? But write books and defend the papacy all day long. Because that's now the locus of the religion. The whole religion now is in essence the soap opera of what's happening in Rome. However, at the same time, you're also told, and this brings us to our third cope, you're also told that what happens in Rome, I don't care. I don't even have to be concerned. I have literally no concern with what's happening in Rome and what Francis is up to. All I care about is I have the Latin Mass. I have a conservative Novus Ordo Mass. I go to church. I take my family to sacraments. I don't have to concern myself with what's going on in Rome. Well, if we don't have to concern ourselves with what's going on in Rome and we can ignore Rome, you're beginning to make the point that Orthodox have made all along. So Rome isn't really that relevant to your Christian faith and expression at the local level, is it? And yet when you were converting out of Protestantism, and yet when you were arguing with your Protestant friends, you weren't singing that line. You were telling them that you need the papacy. You need the papacy to know what the dogmas are, to know the faith, to know the truth, to be guided morally to tough landscape of the modern world. And the papacy will guard and preserve and protect our morals so that they're not changing and subject to flux, except that you've already adopted a position of doctrinal development, which undermines a static, unchanging morality. And why was that? Well, because that became one of the most popular ways to defend the fact that the Vatican I definition of the papacy was not present in the first 1,000 years. And as we've highlighted probably 500 times, Roman Catholic apologists will vacillate back and forth between, correct, Vatican I's view of the papacy was always there from the earliest days. It was always taught. Oh, but it was also an evolving thing like a seed that grew into a tree. Because those are mutually exclusive positions. But Roman Catholic apologists have no problem trotting out whichever argument works the best in the case that they're in. So, is it true that you can follow a Platonic papacy in your head that is not connected to the one over in Rome? Absolutely not. 100% false. Again, a complete tradcat myth. You have to follow all of the teachings of the Roman See, even if you believe they are wrong if they're ordinary papal teaching. Now, here we could theoretically bring in, I don't know, Francis. Let's say Francis writes a private book that is scandalous. And could a Roman Catholic theoretically say, I'm not concerned with Francis's scandalous private theological book that he wrote? Sure, absolutely. Many Roman Catholics, I'm sure, are not concerned with the scandalous statements that Benedict XVI put in his books before he was Pope. They don't have to hold to those things or be concerned with them. Although, if private theological writings can be heretical, then in that case, it might be a problem, as we said earlier. But I don't know, let's say that something, Francis wrote something that isn't necessarily heretical, but that a lot of Roman Catholics disagreed with. Could they dismiss that? Sure, of course. However, that's not the same thing as his encyclicals and his public apostolic constitutions and teachings. Anytime he's teaching on faith and morals in a public way for the church, and all encyclicals are for the church, they're ordinary teaching for the church, you must submit to them with docility. Even if you think there's an area that's wrong, or he didn't word this right, or this is absolutely theologically erroneous, you disagree with it, you don't have the right to rebel, to critique, or to go against the Roman See. And all of the examples that Roman Catholics will give of how they can disagree with the Roman See, rebuke the Roman See, correct the Roman See, all that does is undermine the teaching of Vatican I and prove the Orthodox attitude. Exactly, you're now operating like an Orthodox person, that there's no super bishop who has super quisatz haderach God powers. That's not the teaching of the papacy. Oh, really? You mean Dictatus Papae and Unum Sanctum? Those haven't been rescinded. They're still on the books. Do you even know what Dictatus Papae and Unum Sanctum says? Unum Sanctum says you have to accept the temporal authority of the Roman bishop to be saved. Well, the Pope took off his triple crown, so that's a symbolic gesture. Well, I thought dogmas don't change. I thought faith and morals don't change. So now to be saved post Unum Sanctum of Boniface VIII, it is necessary to believe in the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop, that he's the quisatz haderach. That is necessary for salvation according to that dogmatic teaching. But nowadays it's not, because I guarantee if we surveyed a large portion of the Roman Catholic world and of the episcopate and of the cardinals, I'm willing to bet post-Vatican II, probably a majority of them do not believe in the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop. Interesting. So why was it necessary for salvation in the 1300s to believe that? And now it's not necessary for salvation. This idea that the papacy guards the morals and keeps them static and unchanging is absolutely ludicrous and totally historically false. That's why this system has to set up so many fail-safes to keep it unfalsifiable. And an unfalsifiable system has the appearance of impenetrability and strength, but is actually very fragile. So no, you don't have the position to accept a Platonic chair of Peter that you are in communion with and that you're not concerned with over in Rome. Vatican I is very clear that the living successor to Peter is the embodiment of the teaching authority of Peter. There is no Platonic papacy in your head in the realm of the forms. The only papacy that exists is the one in Rome, where Francis is. So this is a complete Protestant fiction that you can create a magisterium in your head. And yet, what do we see but countless trad cats and conservative Roman Catholics doing this very thing? 4, this one is a funny one because this one comes up all the time. I saw it today. It was all over. The Catholic Church to be the true church because it's persecuted. Why? We wouldn't see so much corruption unless it's the true church. So let's follow the logic of this. So the more corrupt an institution is, the more godly it is. Remember when Michael Voris, many years ago, who eventually got outed? Michael Voris said that the most graced people were the ones that were the most tempted with proclivities, so shall we say. What? Well, this is the same logic of the more corrupt our institution is, the more we are validated. This is another weird type of unfalsifiable system. Because it doesn't matter how corrupt it is, how much chaos, insanity comes out with Gladio and the Vatican Bank and the CIA and all this kind of stuff, and the arms trafficking and the money laundering. Oh, well, that just proves, you see, even further, that we're the true church because it's super duper corrupt and thus persecuted. Yet at the same time, this very week, this very day, countless Roman Catholics came at me and countered me by saying, you have all these problems in your church. You have liberal bishops. You have a skittle bishop or two here or there. Your guy over here in Africa ordained a deaconess. You can't be the true church. Now, wait a minute. I thought corruption proved the true church. Oh, only when it's the Roman Catholic argument does it prove. You see how silly this is. Ridiculous double standards. So corruption proves the Roman Catholic Church. Corruption disproves the Orthodox Church. All of these arguments, I hope you guys can see this. This is why, having basic logic, understanding basic fallacies is so useful across the board. You see, all these are fallacies. Every one of these arguments is based on some kind of silly mental trick that is like a giant house of cards that falls apart right away if you really think about it. And the last couple, 0.5 is going to be tied. There's two errors tied for, two copes tied for 0.5. And that is, number one of the two, 5a. Well, I'm not going to leave the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not going to worry with the theology. It's my identity. This is my family tradition. Family tradition, right, in the words of Hank. What does that have to do at all with something being true or false? Oh, it has absolutely nothing to do with anything being true or false. And what do you say to a person who says, oh, well, I was raised in a bloodline satanic family. That's my family tradition. I'm going to remain in a weird Buddhist cult. I'm going to remain in Scientology. It's my family tradition. You see how silly this argument is. And yet, countless Roman Catholics will repeat this as if this is some sort of strength, like show of strength. This is my family, my heritage. I'll always be a Roman Catholic. Now, let's flesh out some more fallacies associated with that. What your heritage and your tradition, wait a minute, if we keep going back far enough, wouldn't we reach pagans? Is that your heritage and tradition that you should actually go back to? You see how silly this is. This is a terrible argument. And don't the same people always bitch about, you Orthodox, you're all ethnic, you worship your ethnicity, look at their ethnic. By the way, I'm an Italian Roman Catholic, and that's my heritage and my nationalism. You see how silly this is. Constantly contradicting themselves. My family tradition. And yet every one of them would tell a Buddhist to convert when a Buddhist says, that's my family tradition. And then attached to number 5 as part B is Marian apparitions. Marian apparitions. I just had an interesting conversation with Father Deacon, and I thought I knew a lot about this. Apparently, there's this whole other apparition phenomena in Ireland. I'd never heard of it, and it's crazy. Now, Father Deacon Ananias knew about this because he studied, I think he did his doctorate in Ireland, and so he was over there for many years and spent a lot of time in the Irish Catholic world and saw a lot of what was going on. And he was explaining that when he was in a phase of leaving Protestantism He was raised, I think, Lutheran, and was trying to figure out, well, am I going to go Catholic? Am I going to go Anglican? Am I going to go Orthodox? He spent a lot of time kind of in the world of Irish Catholicism, and he went to this mystic site. I'm not sure what we want to call this, but this is pretty crazy. So it's called the House of Prayer Achill. And this is a woman who, in the 80s, Christina Gallagher, a housewife who was part of Karen's Grotto in Sligo. And she claimed suddenly to be having visions from the suffering head of Christ, and then Mary appeared. When Mary appeared, she claimed to have stigmata on her feet, and Mary told her to set up her house as the house of prayer. And it was at that time in the 90s opened by Archbishop Cassidy. It was then given a tax-exempt status, so this was not done initially outside of the purview of the hierarchy. The problem is that if you go back up here and read about this, it was quickly turned into the House of Prayer Limited. That is a trading company, a company that trades as Our Lady. It's a corporation. And so it became very controversial, even though it was originally given the blessing of the Archbishop there. And so even though it's a cult, the Roman Catholic Church did not do anything to excommunicate anyone or stop anything. And then we had alleged miracles. I think so I take that back, in the 1990s, later on by 96, the next Archbishop after Cassidy, Archbishop Neary, established a commission to investigate the claims of the phenomenon there. The investigation concluded no supernatural, but that the people gave evidence of good faith. So even still, it was kind of just let be. But what's very evident, as Father Deacon noted by his visits here, is that the whole thing is obviously a giant scam. They're not curing people from resurrecting babies. They're not curing pancreatic cancer. The woman isn't a stigmatist. It's a trading company, a limited trade company that trades as a corporation. This is so obviously ridiculous. Now, well, that ain't Fatima. Well, that ain't Medjugorje. Oh, wait a minute. Fatima. Let's talk about Fatima for a minute, because although we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, if you want a longer treatise, we cover Fatima here. People are like, can I buy stock? Yeah, look this up on Robinhood and see if you can buy stock in House of Prayer Limited. Everyone seems to have forgotten that last year, or was it 2 years ago? 2 years ago, all the Roman Catholic world erupted in gyrations and fervor, tingling going up their leg, that Francis was about to consecrate Russia and Ukraine, and that this would finally fulfill Fatima. Has everyone already forgotten this? I haven't forgotten, because we laughed and made fun of all the Roman Catholics at the time and said exactly what was going to happen, which is exactly what happened, which is absolutely nothing. Did they all forget this? Pope Francis is about to consecrate Russia. We're about to win. We're about to own the Orpho Bros. They're going down. Finally, Mary has sided with us. Oh, nothing happened. Oh, it was a big bust, as we said. And then, turns out, what happens? Let's look at all the trotting out of Fatima. Have you not figured out that this gets rolled out whenever it's needed? And even the other trads have made this ridiculous chart showing how fraudulent and ridiculous Fatima is. 1942, Pius XII. Will the commands of Mary be fulfilled? Order all the bishops to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart. Did Pius XII do that? No, he didn't order all the bishops. Did he consecrate it? He did a consecration, but he didn't order all the bishops, and Russia wasn't mentioned. But there was a consecration to the Immaculate Heart. Dang it! We came so close. A couple months later, Pius XII, he's going to do it again. No, he does the exact same thing again. Dang it! July 1952, Pius XII. He's finally going to, 10 years later. Dang it. He only gets 3 of the 4 criteria. He doesn't order all the bishops. He just consecrates Russia to the Immaculate Heart. So this is the most ridiculous code. Do you see how? So look, you want to trot out Fatima to me? It's a miracle. If it's a miracle, why all this nonsense? Literally, all they have to do is do these 4 things. Every trad cat will pull up this dumb chart to explain, to cope as to why the papacy hasn't really done the consecration and fulfilled Our Lady's requests. How hard would it be for any of these people to do it? Oh, let's fast forward past Paul VI. 1982, John Paul II is going to do it. Oh, he just does a consecration of the world. Dang it. And not even the Mary. 1984, John Paul II, he orders all the bishops to consecrate the world. Dang. This is preposterous. Who could actually believe this? Well, only people who are locked into a ridiculous, unfalsifiable sort of cult. I don't know how else to describe this. And you understand that when you are actually in the Roman Catholic world, okay, 99.9% of people are not sitting around reading Denzinger. They don't know what Denzinger is. They don't have the faintest idea what Denzinger is. But they know about Fatima, and they'll make charts detailing like freaking fantasy football sports bros to figure out who did and didn't do what in the last 70 years in regard to this. Is preposterous. This is ridiculous. So you understand, you're not just signing on to, I only have to believe 5 dogmas. No, you don't. You got to believe all this stuff too. I don't have to believe Fatima. It's not actually dogma. It is not part of the handed down magisterial and divine revelation. Yeah, but you are going to be laughed out of the Roman Catholic world if you don't believe Fatima, because for all intents and purposes, they receive it as dogma. It is essentially divine revelation in a practical sense. Have you met any Roman Catholics that don't believe Fatima? I've never met one. In fact, the Marian stuff is their ultimate fallback. They think this is like the ultimate irrefutable, unassailable, like, all right, well, they might have us on everything else, or they'll never get us on this. Really? I mean, is this the essence of the religion that Jesus established? Just basically mastering a giant role-playing game chart about Fatima? This is what Jesus has us up to, figuring out fantasy football charts about what was and wasn't completed. This is ridiculous. And another practical anecdote. When I was in the Tradcat world, I met tons of people who could tell you all of the arcana and the lore of Fatima. And they didn't know anything about the church fathers. They had no idea what Clement's letters were about, what Cyprian said. They never read Athanasius. They didn't know what was in the Bible. Tradcats actually laud and are proud of their ignorance of the Bible, but they will obsess over this crazy stuff. So that's what I'm getting at. You're not going to find the healing in this religion of dead works and all of this absurdity. You will find people eventually getting depressed, becoming alcoholics, drinking a lot, being unhappy because they're not being healed there. Because it's a religion that has the form and the loss of the power. And that's why Francis is all about open borders, and Francis is all about climate change, and Francis is all about all the other globalist policies. And so for all you conservative trads out there, Francis hates you. Francis despises you. In fact, half of the things Francis does is a middle finger to you. So the very person that you are trying to convince the world to come under is your worst enemy. And once you figure that out, you won't be in this group anymore. You won't be in this organized crime sect. Imagine thinking Jesus intended to have a giant international world bank for black ops. You think that's what Jesus... He's walking around the Sea of Galilee. He's talking to the apostles. Oh, and by the way, things are really going to be hype. Things are really going to be cool when we get a giant Vatican bank that has all the same usury and money laundering as all the other banks out there. Won't that be smooth? Won't that be awesome when we get that there? All right, we're going to open it up. Those are my 5 arguments. And for those who would like to read a really fascinating paper by an academic who, I don't know whether he's Catholic or what he is, but this is not a conspiracy paper. This is an in-depth academic analysis of one of the famous apparitions of recent note, the Bayside apparitions. This was one of the most fascinating geopolitics papers I've read in a long time. It's called The Virgin and the Bomb, the Bayside Apparitions, Cold War Anxieties, and Marian Anti-Communism. And the reason I recommend this paper is because it will give you a really in-depth insight into how and in what ways the Marian apparitions were absolutely used in the Cold War, especially for Western intelligence, psyops, and deception. That becomes very evident in this example. And even though it's not written as a quote conspiracy text, it doesn't have to be. I mean, even EMJ thinks that like Medjugorje was fake and was part of like psyops and stuff.